Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem. The infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? So welcome to another episode of the Athens and Jerusalem podcast. I was thinking of the meaning of historical knowledge, or what does historical knowledge or knowledge from history have to say about faith and about having a faith as a person. And the reason why I started to think of this is that I think we often today, and even in our podcast, when we try to explain how school or how the society should try to bring in the question of religious thinking, we often start to say that everybody should have the possibility to explore their own faith and explore their own way of having meaning in life. But then I just think that sometimes we become too focused on presentism, too much focus on what is actually our faith in today's society, and also looking towards the future. And that we often forget the past. So I've just tried to, and I remember also you, Stephen, you often talk about these narratives, the importance of narratives. And then I'm just wondering if we should try to have an episode on historical knowledge, and what does actually historical knowledge give to the human being and to our ability to have a faith. So do you have any thoughts on the topic?
I would have a question, like a provocative question, I suppose. Whose history?
Yes, and in many ways, I would say that all knowledge is historical knowledge. In a way that it is always something that has already been. When we are sitting here talking to each other, this is the moment, and when listeners are listening to us in the future, that's the moment they are listening. And all knowledge being given to human being or faith or thoughts, historical narratives, whatever, it is always something that's from the past. So that's my simple way of thinking of history.
When I think of the question, I think of two possible directions we could go. The pro and the con. But I'll start with the con, I suppose, and that follows up from my question. If we talk about the possibility of including more historical knowledge in our educational programs, then it begs the question: well, whose history? Because history is always a local, contextual collection of facts. So and so begat so and so, or so and so was the ruler, or this this empire overtook this empire, or what have you. And if we want, and there's only so many of these facts that one can deliver in an educational course. So you have to pick and choose, well, which facts, which historical facts. And the danger is that you end up picking a historical perspective that is ultimately kind of tribal in nature, and you end up you end up possibly with a kind of static worldview in which you're looking backwards in history to some imagined, time when this or that tribe or people was at their peak, and you end up potentially reinforcing an identity which is local rather than global, whereas the practical need for today is for more of a global story rather than a local story. And how do you tell history without inevitably being local? So that would be the con. But then on the other side, and I don't know where I even land on this, just because we're kind of speaking very extemporaneously. On the pro side, we look at the last few hundred years, since the Enlightenment, and one of many ways of talking about the Enlightenment is that it's a passage of the human race from superstition to knowledge. And part of the Enlightenment program has been tossing out all these stories, tossing out all of these fictional narratives, tossing out the superstitions of the past, and just sticking with the facts, just sticking with what the facts of reality are, what the scientific facts of things are. And this ends up de-emphasizing history, de-emphasizing the stories, de-emphasizing the narratives. But are we throwing out, as we've talked in past episodes, are we tossing out the baby with the bathwater if we think the best way of educating is just delivering facts and letting go of the stories and letting go of the narratives? And we come back to this question of how libraries are designed. You have a fiction section and a nonfiction section, and the maybe overgeneralized way of talking about modernity is that we focus on the nonfiction section of the library, and education is all about delivering the facts that are in the nonfiction section of the library. The fiction section, which is where the stories are, the narratives, our history, all of that is relegated to your free time and things that you do when you're not seriously learning about how the world really works. And maybe I'm looking at this a little too much through the lens of a hard scientist. But on the pro side, the question is, well, don't we need stories? Aren't stories, isn't a sense of our history a part of who we are as human beings, dating back to the birth of language around the ancient campfires, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when human identity was first forged? It was by the telling of stories around the campfire, and these stories construct a history, construct an identity, and that identity was important for us. And to some extent, I was just actually looking at an old article in Smithsonian magazine in which they did this phylogenetic analysis of old fairy tales, and they find that fairy tales that we know are old, like Jack and the Beanstalk, may be far older than even we think they are. We can trace it back a few hundred years when we look at texts, but if you run this phylogenetic analysis, you find that it's thousands and thousands of years old. So some of these stories, what we now call fairy tales, and I include historical accounts as part of that. These are narratives that we construct that help give us a sense of identity, but these are really ancient. They're part of our psyche, and we let go of those at our own peril. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said in the opening of one of the opening books of Masks of God, where he's discussing human mythology, he's describing our myths, and he says that human civilization is it's not like stones resting upon the surface, but the roots of it go much deeper than we think, much deeper than we suspect. And if we stick to the surface level, which is the domain of facts, then we're missing out on the deeper roots of human identity. So which do we land on? Do we say, let's get rid of the stories because those tend to make us more tribal, tend to make us more, tend to get us away from the global consciousness that we need today? Or do we find a way of bringing in those stories, of validating the different stories of humanity, but then pointing the way towards a new story? So what's the new history that we build, and what facts do we select from our past to build that new history and that new sense of identity? The old Athens, Jerusalem question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, which do we emphasize?
But I could just say that this question about the what why we should not do it. I'm not sure that. Of course, if we always look at what is different between all the stories or all the historical facts, and also that the possibility that there could have been different stories and different, like in the history of philosophers. Nowadays, we know other philosophers that hasn't had the same impact on the history, like for instance, women that has had really deep thoughts, but haven't got the same impact, and then they have been like excluded from the history of philosophy. And of course, this is something we can do because we are historical persons, and as you say, we have this, what I would say, an epic dimension in our being. And it's an extremely important one, and even like you say, it's especially the oral part of this way of being. But at the same time, if we look at similarities between historical facts, between historical ideas, between historical faith, then we will have the possibility not only to look at the difference, but also to look at what has engaged these people in their thoughts, in their issues. What has been the problems they are trying to capture and to bring into our notion. And this, I think, is one of the most important thing when we try to give historical knowledge to human beings, is not to tell the facts, but to tell to bring up the problems, to bring up what was Kant or Augustine, what did they really, what was their thoughts and their way of thinking around the problems, and hopefully this, in my opinion, I think this could help our generation and the next generation not only to have an identity and to have something common, but also to be aware of the problems and to be aware of the connection with history, as you say, getting deeper down. And I think that would help them also to understand themselves, to understand that the problems and the questions and the meanings they are trying to solve today is not something that is new. And I think maybe that could help them also.
Yeah, if I may sort of continue from that, I think from what I understand, especially in the Nordic countries, there is well, I mean, this is a postmodern reaction in general, but one hears this often from politicians in Nordic countries, that the problem with religious traditions is that they tend to become hegemonic, and so the idea is that religion should be a private matter. You know, you can believe in whatever you want, just don't talk about it to anybody else, or don't try to convince anybody else about what you're convinced about. And I think that while obviously I don't think that being hegemonious or trying to force people into your own belief system is of any use to anyone, but I think that there is this, you know, what you were referring to, the grand narratives of the past. They have this function of creating a sort of a basis for our identity, but also like uniting us. And I think a challenge and the question is, you know, how can we make use of that identity creating and unifying aspect of historical beliefs without them turning into something that creates divisions between us, or we trying to sort of hit each other on the head with our own particular narrative.
Mm.
So because I think that if matters of belief and sort of the existential and ethical issues, if they just become individual issues, then we are going to lose actually the very sort of glue that keeps society together, as we can see today. I mean, Nordic countries are among the most individualistic countries in the world, and it has had dire effects on the well-being of society and its members. But is there a way to have commonality in our past, in our traditions, without it becoming a matter of disagreement or dominance and division?
It's like we're trying to square a circle. It's never been done before. We can maybe sit here and in our comfortable chairs and say this is what ought to be done, but the thing that needs to be done is squaring a circle. It's taking this incredible diversity of human experiences, incredible diverse perspectives on our history, on who we are, and somehow out of that mix of out of that incredible diversity, which is a barrier to moving forward in a more integrated way, but at the same time, a source of great strength, a source of great pride for us, something which should excite us and entice us, and 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 so forth. How do you get both out of it? And one way I imagine, I just going back to Joseph Campbell, it was a kind of a point of reference for me in thinking about these sorts of things. You can look at this diversity of stories and just savor the diversity of it, but at the same time, pull out those common threads which unite. And for Campbell, this was the idea of the hero's journey, that there's this monomyth, there's this common thread that goes through all human history, whatever continent you arise from, that has something to do with the individual journey of self-transformation. And there's a process that this journey of self-transformation goes through that has surprisingly common elements throughout history. There's you start in a familiar place of the village, you receive the call to adventure, you go forth into the unknown. In that place of unknown, yourself is dissolved in some way. You encounter tests, you might even die. You encounter guides that guide you along the way. And then you acquire this power during this journey, this transformative power that changes you into something else. And you return at the end, because it's a circle, you return at the end to the starting point, to the village, outwardly the same person, but inwardly you've been transformed. If there's a way to sort of tell our common human story through those sorts of threads, that we can see something that we all share in common, but at the same time recognize that these stories have been told in very different ways in different cultures. So, and it's squaring a circle, because if you focus too much on the commonality, then you can be accused of whitewashing histories, of ignoring the cultural differences for the sake of some hegemonic outcome. And on the other hand, if you focus too much on the differences, then it all becomes identity games and sort of division into tribes, and no way of binding things together. So how do you square the circle? How do you sort of bring out, how do you point the way towards a new kind of common narrative for humanity, a sacred narrative for humanity, but not sacred in the sense that it excludes all the secular progress that's been made over the last few centuries through the scientific method, through the application of reason in a very rigorous way, in a way that uncovers the mathematical regularities of the universe. How can you have a true appreciation for the mathematical regularity of the world, the fact that nature speaks in the language of mathematics, and that there are certain laws to the universe that can be written down and understood rationally, and at the same time fully appreciate the power of story, the power of the narratives that we tell each other, and that we've told each other since those early years around the campfire. We can't throw that away. We can't throw away those stories, but we somehow have to transmute them into a modern parlance that is that plays nicely with reason and with and with the idea of progress. And I think behind this is the idea of progress, i.e., that human civilization is not a static thing, but it has been progressing over the millennia, just as physically we've been progressing through our physical evolution, the laws and principles of which we've been uncovering over the last couple of centuries. But in a similar way, human culture has been progressing. And if we have that idea of progress in the back of our minds, that I think can help keep us from looking to the past too much as an anchor that weighs us down. Instead, looking to the past as a source of inspiration, a source of delight, but recognizing that we can't allow ourselves to be anchored down by some imaginary past state that we always compare ourselves to, but realize that our real future and our true greatness that is ours lies in the future and not in the past. But that requires a kind of thinking which I think is more characteristic of the scientific way of thinking than it is of the traditional religious way of thinking. The sort of looking to the future for our our best selves lies in the future, not in the past.
Just
Yeah,
one comment on that one, because I think one of the problem with religious thinking is that they often have this idea that the original way of thinking or that's the best, that's
yes,
what it is the most true way of thinking.
the orthodox way. Yeah.
Yeah, and this idea about originality, or about like the real of history, I think that's very problematic and often very dangerous way of thinking.
But it's understandable because change is dangerous. I mean,
Yeah.
something that worked for a whole society, if you pull the foundation stones out from a stable, a stable configuration of people that's worked for generations, you're in danger of destabilizing it. So it's understandable that one wants to stress things that have worked in the past. I'm not defending it ultimately, but I'm trying to see both sides of it.
Yeah, and of course, in the past, I mean, change has been very, very slow, almost indiscernible. And I think the very point is this, and we have discussed this before too, that humanity for a long time, if we use an analogy, has been in a state of its collective childhood, where it has needed stability more than anything else, that it has needed a very clearly uh, spelled out framework. But now, as we seem to have moved towards um, coming of age of the human race, and are perhaps right now in some sort of a age of civilizational puberty. Anyway, so now we have the possibility of freeing ourselves from that kind of that sense of stability and security that a child has, to a sense of, and I like very much what you were saying about that really it's like the torch has been passed on to us, and that doesn't that doesn't make the journey of the torch up to us less important, but it makes it important for us to realize that now we have to carry it forward, and we have to create something new ourselves, and that is our greatest possibility, and our greatest mission is to create that ideal world of which the past hundreds of generations have only been able to dream of, um, and we can actually make it come true. So in that sense, it's a fulfillment of a preparatory stage, it's a fulfillment of a dream, uh, but it's not just sort of continuing something that's been going on. It's like it's a time when for something that's been going on for a long time and being prepared can now come to a culmination. It can actually bear its fruits, and we are the ones who can help make that become a reality. I think that might be one way that we could reconcile these two elements. I would also like to briefly mention, I mean, just today I was reading, and I couldn't find now but there was some great thinker that was talking about the fact that how we human beings have learned to um, look at the world in dichotomous terms. And somehow we need to, I think that's also part of our maturation, our intellectual and spiritual maturation, is to see beyond dichotomies the essential unity. And although dichotomies can be fruitful in a sort of a pedagogical sense, but at the end of the day, there is really only oneness. And so, yeah.
But I'm not sure. I often find that philosophers today, they are very critical towards dichotomies, and they try to remove everything from and this. And in an earlier podcast, I mentioned that maybe we should keep the dichotomy between soul and body. And
Absolutely.
and that's one of the eldest dichotomy that we have. We in many ways we have tried to solve this problem in different way of thinking, and I'm not sure that we have managed. And I often think when I read people trying to remove that dichotomy, they often end in just body or just neuroscience or yeah. The spirit of human being becomes very empty, and
it becomes a reductionist project.
Unfortunately, yeah. So that's why. But also a different dichotomy that we also mention, and I think there are some dichotomies that are even in my own body. There are some, and also in society and one of those is of course this question about individuality and communality, or how to say it, being belonging to something bigger, something common. And Cameron, you would question this modern thinking of individuality, and Stephen was like trying to say that maybe there is like an individual journey of transformation that we have to everybody. And in my opinion, we could, of course, we really in our society, I think we really struggle of making belonging. That's something to really existing. And I think history has to know more of history is important to belong. But at the same time, I think there is still a place for individuality, but not that kind of individuality we understand as to be unique. I mean that every human being should have like should be different from everybody else. I mean, of course we are. Nothing is totally similar, but at the same time, I think we should try to be aware of what really give human their humanity, the essence of man, that also gives us the opportunity to be individual. And this is, for me, is important, that this idea about sense, about reason and rationality, and also emotions, and our ability to look at emotions in other people and to bring in faith in other people. This is necessarily if we are to be individuals. So I'm not sure that I'm so afraid of dichotomies.
You started with a dichotomy of matter and spirit, and that's a perfect example where I think we can try to square the circle, because on the one hand, it's an extremely useful way of navigating the world, both individually and collectively, to think about our physical world as just one dimension of things, and that having a spirit, having a soul, that that gives us a sense of directionality. Otherwise, we're just kind of floating in space at random. And one way to square that circle is to imagine that you know, the matter piece of it is the idea that we're all in space, and where we are in space is, you know, is relative to our position. But the spirit part of it is that our direction matters. You know, defining forward versus backwards is still very important to us, even if we recognize that you know, our exact position in space may not matter that much. But still, to us, the forward direction is meaningfully differentiated from the backwards direction. And in that sense, spirit is like, you know, the compass that defines a meaningful directionality that makes the forward versus the backward movement meaningful to us. But all of this happens within a space that is that doesn't itself privilege one direction over another direction. I mean, I'm sort of reaching for a metaphor, I guess, that gets us to a meaningful understanding of spirit, embedded in the context of a world which is described accurately in physical terms. You know, how can we have both of these? How can you sort of have your cake and eat it too? And one way is to think of spirit not in the Cartesian sense, in the sort of dichotomous Cartesian sense of a different kind of substance that one then has to try to understand how these substances interact on each other, but rather think of, say, the material world as nouns and the spiritual world as verbs. You know, to think of the material world as the realm of stuff, but the spiritual world is the realm of movement, particularly. And I'm not talking about movement in the sense of velocity as defined in physics, but movement in the sense of moving in a particular direction versus other directions, moving in a preferential direction. And here our spiritual presuppositions, our presuppositions about mind and soul and so forth would say there is a direction to move which is better than other directions. But here we're up against a fundamental dichotomy, which Hume identified in the 1700s. He says you can't bridge between is and ought. So you can describe the world as it is, scientifically or otherwise, as a collection of facts, or you could describe the world ethically, like you ought to do the following. And Hume says you cannot logically derive the ought from the is. There's a gulf in between them. And this is a major question in moral philosophy. And it strikes me that one way of trying to sort of get around that division of is and ought is to put to embed directionality somehow metaphysically into the universe. So, and one way to do that, and I guess what I'm reaching for is some kind of story of stories, some kind of meta narrative that can embrace these past meta narratives, is that the story of the cosmos is the story of consciousness emerging, and at the end point of consciousness emerging is that it ends up becoming the creative principle itself. So consciousness ends up generating itself. This is an ancient idea, but one thing it can suggest for us is a directionality to things that is somehow intrinsic, but still embedded within a world that can be described fully in scientific terms. And that directionality is the direction of consciousness. So what we would say, how we might sum this up, is to say that intrinsically, the world is not so much made up of atoms, but it's made up of small acts of kindness. Because small acts of kindness, writ large, end up binding things together into larger configurations, unlocking higher degrees of consciousness, which is part of the arrowhead, the metaphysical arrowhead of the universe, because that consciousness at the end point ends up being its own generative principle. I don't know if this sounds like gobbledygook, but I'm trying to summarize too much in too few words, I guess. But I'm addressing this question of dichotomy, and I'm trying to sort of validate it, and at the same time offer a perspective that enables us to get outside of that dichotomy, to sort of to bridge the is and the ought.
Yeah.
Could a different way of saying this be to say that the physical world, or the world of the external world, also have a spiritual existence, so that the spirituality is not only something that is inside a human being, but it's actually something that is part of being? Because if we start with Hume, we often say that is okay. Ought is something that is happening inside humans, and is the external world. But if we look back to the Aristotelian physics, then he would say that existence has like a dark matter, a quality. Yeah, and of course the same would Plato say that. I think also that would keep that your idea about what would be this what is common, what is this spirituality is okay, it's love, or is to the good, or to just this small feelings of care, and of course that's Plato's way of thinking of what cosmos is all about.
Yes, it's I mean, to contrast it with Descartes' dualism, it's more a position of metaphysical idealism. It's contrasting both Descartes' dualism, which divides the world fundamentally into mind and matter, and it also contrasts with the modern materialistic mindset that everything is atoms in the end. Both of these ideas can be traced back to the ancient Greeks, but the idealism that I'm proposing also, I suppose, can be traced all the way back to Plato, who proposes that these forms are the ultimate ground of existence, and that what we observe as the physical world are just sort of outer reflections of these forms, which are themselves more mental or at least abstract in nature. So if the world is really grounded in consciousness, and consciousness gives rise to what we perceive as matter, which then self-assembles to generate the consciousness, which is its own cause, then we have a picture which is, I suppose, more aligned with metaphysical idealism than it is with either Cartesian dualism or materialism. And that's why we can say these apparently crazy things like the fundamental constituents of the universe are small acts of kindness, because of course kindness is a very human word, but what I mean is that principle can be extended to even rocks and plants, and the sun shining on a plant is a small act of kindness, in the sense that I mean it. I'm thinking I'm thinking a little bit, and I've been listening a bit recently to some and reading some work of Bernardo Kastrup, who's a modern exponent, who's helping to revive the popularity of this kind of idealism, and this idea that that we can see consciousness as the ground of things rather than inert matter. And I think that has a further potential to give us a kind of grounding for a new kind of sacred narrative that can have profound social consequences in the world. It's a way for us to going from our different roots in different traditions, in our different tribal, national, racial, religious traditions and identities. It's a way to start from those identities and to sort of bring it forward into a new kind of future that sees it all and accepts and embraces it all as part of this waking up of the universe to its own reality. In that sense, we're a way for the cosmos to know itself. We're a way for the cosmos to create itself, to sort of one up Carl Sagan's phrase from Cosmos.
I mean, from what I understand, all the major world religions have this sort of futuristic notion of the world at some point in the far future becoming some sort of a heaven on earth kind of state, right? And like in Christianity, there's this concept of God's kingdom on earth. And I think that, in a sense, perhaps represents the dissolving of a certain kind of dichotomous thinking, and also, I mean, all of these things that we've been talking about, and the importance of history and and grand narrative, that somehow we as humanity have been developing towards this point where finally we can see the connection between the material and the spiritual, and we can actually create a world where the material becomes a reflection of the spiritual, and the spiritual manifests itself in everything. And so even though there's a difference between the material and the spiritual, but they're not separate completely. And so
I just wonder if could that also be about how human have this dimension of hope. Yeah, to have hope is like something that is really important and necessary for human existence. I just want to tell you also, I've been doing some research on the famous Norwegian painter Edvard Munch recently. Something is really happening with Edvard Munch's painting around 1909, and he'd been to a nerve clinic and he had alcohol problems, and something changed. And in my research, I tried to understand, because in 1910 somebody says that that Munch has become Platonist, and I'm trying to check out this idea. Before 1909, he was very into Nietzsche, and he was very into this idea that to be a painter, to be a genius creator, you have to suffer. But after 1909, he writes and he paints different paintings that tells him that love and to be good is that also something that is powers inside a human being that could bring geniusity. So instead of thinking that the pain and to have pain and to suffer is the way of creating, then he starts to think of the good and love. And I also see that because he met a philosopher in Germany in 1908, and this philosopher, I think, has great impact on him, and he's critical against Nietzsche, and he has this idea about Plato, and I think that's also something you can see in his painting, from painting the Scream before, and also painting like these. I'm not sure if you have seen this about these three girls at the fjord looking down into the deep dark ocean. Now he starts to paint the sun, to paint human gazing towards the sun. Yeah, and the colors become brighter. You should try to look, check out the Aula paintings in Oslo, if you have some possibility. Also in internet, you would really look. You could have this notion that Plato has some kind of inspiration in his painting. I think this is also something that this is also a dichotomy, or it has something to do with what we are talking about. That we have this idea that our way of creating and to become to become something new is to be in pain, or really trying to give something good into human beings. I think that's an important It's the opposite of Heraclitus, who says that war is the father of everything. Then we often forget that we also have as a mother.
Sounds like he went through his own hero's journey, and there's a turning point around 1909.
Yeah. So please check it out. If you look at the paintings of Edvard Munch, check out if it's painted before or after 909. 1909. Yes.
Yeah, if he
Yeah,
wrote about this,
that's
it'd be very interesting to see how he describes that, the inner transformation that's reflected in these paintings.
that was very beautiful. What you mentioned, Knut Ove, about Munch, because I think in some sense, to me, when I was listening to you, it made me think of really of the development of human race, and how, we have at certain point in our development, we have been described as being beasts unto each other, and we have shown more of that screaming face of our lower nature, and now maybe the time has come that we also bring both. I mean, that we make it evident to ourselves that there is more to us, as you were saying, that what is true human nature, that it is not what we have seen much of human history, but it's something much higher than that, and it's been waiting to mature and to make itself known to us.
I think that's a very nice interpretation, and it's also funny because we started this session by discussing should history have something to give human beings, and I tried to tell like a historical story about Edvard Munch and his life in the beginning of the 20th century, and maybe this example really is a good example of what we are trying to explain, what history and historical knowledge could help human being today. Without not necessarily saying that we should learn from history, but also that we could feel the importance of what these human being has gone through, and that's also something that we ourselves are going through.
Yes, and this is, I think, what Stephen was also beautifully referring to, sort of the Odyssey of humanity, right? That we, through this journey of history, we have transformed, and we have learned to understand our true selves and to manifest that. So we are not the same humanity who started the sea journey.
I think
we're waking up.
Yes.
St. Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child,
Yes.
but now I'm an adult, and I can see reality as it is, to paraphrase. And I think we're going through that painful transition.
Yes.
But of course, you can't say that without it being a narrative, because how can you objectively say that it's true that progress is a thing? How can you objectively say it's true that humanity is passing through stages of childhood, adolescence, and so forth? That itself is a narrative for which nature itself doesn't tell that to us. We tell that story to ourselves. But I think but it's not merely a fairy tale that we say that has no grounding, because in telling that to ourselves, I think we can actually take our place in the forefront of the creative process in a cosmic sense.
I think it's also another dichotomy we were touching upon, and that's between being conservative, trying to have trust in what is worth caring for, of the knowledge we already have perceived, and also to be in the process, and to be critical, and to be I think this dichotomy between trust and critique. What should we trust, and what should we be critical towards, and to try to to be in the progress. I think that's also something that we will always stay in this dichotomy.
Wonderful.
So yeah, so maybe we should just end there. I think we
Yes.
we are.
This has been a very, very interesting, at least for me, a very interesting and journey of our conversations, and I couldn't really see where it was going to lead us, but I think there's been, at least has opened many, many new realizations to myself. Thank you for that.
That's very nice. I hope also the listeners have enjoyed listening to us. So
Yes.
see you next time.
Yes. We keep on sailing.
In progress.
In progress.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.